truth is, even meat eaters like me get roughly half their protein a day from plants by eating things that contain some kind of beans, peas, nuts, or whole grains like corn, rice, and oats. In fact, many high-performance athletes are switching to a plant-based diet because studies have shown it can help reduce measures of inflammation by almost 30% in just 3 weeks, and inflammation makes it harder to recover after a workout. So if a plant-based diet is good enough for Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kyrie Irving, Lewis Hamilton, Venus and Serena Williams, Nate Diaz, and a growing butt ton of others, it's probably good enough for me and my weekly rec league soccer game.
Ballin' like Curry.
You can ultimately utilize this in any way you would use traditional ground beef.
So tacos, lasagna, meatballs.
You name it.
They're so good. This is a plant-based burger, and look at the mess I'm making. Kind of wanted to talk to you about plant-based meat, and I thought maybe we could try them out as well.
Sure.
But as a control, I know you're a big fan of Dick's Burgers. So to kind of cleanse the palate, I thought we could just take a bite.
That's the real thing.
The real thing. As a non-Seattle native, I've got to say, I think this may be an acquired taste.
Yeah, you get used to a certain burger.
You get used. And so now it's time for my cooking. What do you think?
It's quite good. I mean, that's light years away from what they used to make.
Like the traditional veggie burger?
Right. You know, the quality's going to keep getting better. The plant-based guys are not done innovating. Eventually, they claim you won't be able to tell the difference.
Next up was my killer bratwurst.
Wow. Well, that's pretty good.
And at this point in my quest, I felt like I had a pretty good lock on questions 1 and 2. So I asked him about number 3.
The agriculture sector is about 18% of overall emissions, but livestock is about half of that 18%.
Wow.
And almost all of that is beef.
Is this like cow farts, cow burps?
Slightly more burps than farts, but it's a mix of those two.
To put that into perspective, that means that sector alone is responsible for more greenhouse gases than all the cars, trucks, trains, ships, and planes combined. Turns out, it takes a lot of stuff to make a cow.
Very inefficient, particularly beef, is almost 8 to 1. You use 8 calories to feed that cow for every calorie of meat you get out because you're building bone and respiration for that cow.
Now this was a really good point I hadn't fully considered. If you think about it, as humans, we're really solar powered. We eat plants, but they get their energy from the sun. Then you might be like, we also eat animals though. But they get their energy from plants too, which again, get their energy from the sun. So when it comes to getting our energy from the sun, animals are an inefficient middleman. We get on average 10% of our calories or energy in a day from meat. That might sound reasonable until you look at the amount of resources it takes to make that meat compared to the other 90%. If you combined all the land in the US dedicated to raising animals, you would get an area like this. And then plus this much more to grow the crops needed to feed those animals. Now remember, all of that is for the middleman, for 10% of our daily energy. Now compare that to the amount of land needed for crops we actually eat ourselves directly. That relatively small chunk of land is where the overwhelming majority of our personal energy comes from. And it's not just land resources, but water as well. To end up with 24 hamburger patties, it requires the amount of water you see in this pool. That same amount of water could make 75 loaves of whole grain bread and 30 jars of peanut butter. So if I made myself a delicious peanut butter sandwich, which has nearly the identical amounts of both calories and proteins compared to this patty, and then I ate 2 a day, the meat would last me a little over a week, and the sandwiches would last me a little over a year. So that's the same amount of resources used, same amount of calories and protein to me per serving. One just lasted me a year longer because it's a much more efficient energy transfer method. This is why a plant-based diet is a way more efficient use of natural resources. We could feed an additional 3.5 billion people worldwide if all countries just ate the stuff they fed to animals. And here's why that fact matters.
Particularly as people get richer, they tend to eat more meat. If we don't do anything, this sector will actually grow over time.
So you're saying not just the fact that there's more people and a larger population, but as people move up towards the middle class, they want to consume more meat. And you can certainly see that this is true when you look at the amount of meat consumed over the past 50 years. Given the resources required, a trajectory for meat consumption like this is simply unsustainable. A few decades ago, meat was considered a luxury product, but now it's a commodity for a growing number of people. In fact, the demand is growing so much, it now makes sense for farmers in the Amazon just to burn it down and to turn that forests into grazing land for animals. We've irreversibly lost 20% of the Amazon so far. And that's a double gut punch, because now not only is that more cow farts adding to climate change, but when you burn those trees, all the carbon stored inside them goes back into the atmosphere as the greenhouse gas CO2.
One of the great tragedies about climate is that it's the poorest in the world, the farmers who live fairly near to the equator, that all this heat and flooding and droughts, they're going to suffer by far the most. If you're just trying to get people to cut back, don't eat meat, don't drive to work, don't take trips, it's such a dramatic set of sacrifices that everybody has to engage in, that without innovation, we're probably going to go way past the 2 degrees.
And that last part is the silver lining. Plant-based meat is the exact kind of innovation Bill's referring to here. And I'm optimistic because as the demand for plant-based meats goes up, the price will come down, much lower than actual meat. So then not only will the experience be identical to eating meat, but it's better for you, better for animals, and much better for the planet. Oh, and it also costs half as much. It just becomes a really easy decision for people to switch in massive numbers. All right, so what does this all mean? Now that I've completed my quest for answers, where do I stand? And I'll say it still makes me really uncomfortable to think about these factory farms or the Amazon being burned down to make room for more cows, but at the same time, I can't really blame these poor remote farmers who know nothing about what a greenhouse gas is for just trying to feed their family. As long as the demand for meat continues to grow, there will be an incentive to be not cool to our mutual friend, Mother Earth. So the most effective thing we can do is try and reduce that demand. So after all this, I'm not a vegan. I'm not even strictly on a plant-based diet, but I have reduced the amount of meat I consume by more than half, and I feel great. Importantly, I've broken from that weird mindset that for it to be considered a true meal, it has to have some form of meat. So if any part of this video rang true to you, I would say don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. You can find plant-based meat options in thousands of restaurants and even at Burger King and Carl's Jr. Most grocery stores have a whole section dedicated to them, so you can substitute it into your favorite home-cooked meal. And remember, it doesn't have to be binary, like you either eat no meat or you're frickin' Ron Swanson. If a bunch of people did Meatless Monday, for example, that would have a huge impact on demand. Some of the challenges we face globally can feel pretty daunting, and so I love seeing clever people innovating on the front lines, trying to make it as easy as possible for the rest of us to make the right choices. It gives me hope about our future here together and inspires me to want to do my part.